I switched the DNA tests because I already knew the truth. I just needed everyone else to see it too. And that was the day I stopped being the quiet grandmother sitting at the end of the table and became the woman they should have been afraid of all along. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 68 years old, and for 7 years I watched my daughter-in-law build a perfect life on something that never belonged to her, something she thought no one would ever question, least of all me. It started the day my grandson Ethan was born, a warm spring morning in Boston, sunlight spilling through the hospital windows, everyone smiling, everyone celebrating. Daniel held the baby like he was holding the entire future in his arms, and Olivia stood beside him, glowing, composed, almost too composed. I remember thinking she looked more relieved than joyful, but I told myself I was imagining things. Grief does strange things to you, and I had buried my husband just 8 months before that day. I wanted to believe this child was a new beginning for all of us, and for a while, I played my role perfectly. I baked cookies on Sundays, I showed up with small gifts, I smiled when Olivia corrected how I held the baby or reminded me to wash my hands again even when I already had. She always had a reason, always a polite tone, but there was something beneath it, something controlled, measured, like she was managing a situation instead of living in it. Over time, I noticed the small things. Things no one else seemed to see. Ethan's features didn't quite align with our family, not Daniel's dark hair. Not my late husband's sharp jawline. Not even Olivia's softer features. He was beautiful, of course he was, but different in a way I couldn't explain without sounding like a suspicious old woman. So I stayed quiet. I watched. I waited. Years passed like that. Birthdays, holidays. Carefully staged family dinners where Olivia sat at the center like she had always belonged there. And Daniel slowly stopped asking questions, stopped noticing things. He trusted her completely. The way a man trusts the life he's built, and I suppose that's what she counted on. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. It was a routine pediatric visit. Nothing unusual. Olivia had asked me to take Ethan because she was busy, something she said more often lately. The nurse handed me a clipboard with forms, and among them was a lab request for blood work. Standard, she said. Just routine screening. I nodded. But when I looked closer, I saw a note referencing a previous test, one I had never heard about. The dates didn't make sense, the codes didn't match what I remembered from earlier visits, and when I asked, the nurse hesitated just long enough for me to notice. She smiled, polite, dismissive, but I had lived long enough to recognize when someone was choosing their words carefully. I didn't press her, not then. I simply took the paper, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my purse. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the same table where I had spent decades feeding my family, and I laid out the documents under the soft yellow light. I read every line, every code, every date, and slowly, piece by piece, something began to form. Not a full picture, not yet, but enough to tell me that something had been altered, something had been hidden, and more importantly, that it had been hidden for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I poured myself a cup of tea, the way I always did when I needed to think. And I asked myself one simple question. If this were true, if what I was beginning to suspect was real, why would Olivia go to such lengths? And the answer came to me with a clarity that felt almost cold. Because she believed no one would ever check, she believed that time had buried the truth deep enough that it would never surface. And that was the moment I understood something else. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to accuse anyone. I just needed proof. Undeniable, quiet, precise proof. The kind that doesn't argue, doesn't explain, just exists. And that was when I made my decision. I would let them believe everything was exactly as it had always been. I would smile at family dinners. I would listen to Olivia talk about school schedules and weekend plans. I would play the role she had written for me. But behind that silence, I would start putting the pieces together. And when the time came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't need to. Because the truth, when it's finally seen, has a way of speaking louder than anything else. I did not go back to the hospital the next day or the day after that, because I had learned something important over the years. The truth does not reveal itself to people who rush. It reveals itself to people who pay attention. So I stayed home. I followed my routine. I watered the small rose bush my husband planted 20 years ago. I made my coffee the same way I always had. 2 teaspoons of sugar and just enough cream to soften the bitterness. And I let my mind move slowly through what I had seen, the dates, the codes, the hesitation in that nurse's voice. None of it was loud or obvious. But together, it formed a pattern that did not belong in a normal family story. Later that afternoon, Olivia called, her voice bright and controlled as always, asking how the appointment went. I told her everything was fine, that Ethan had been brave, that the nurse said he was healthy. And there was a small pause on the other end of the line. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for me. As if she had been waiting for something else, something I did not say. She quickly filled the silence with details about dinner plans and a new schedule for Ethan's activities, and I listened, just like I always had, agreeing when needed, offering nothing more than what was expected. That evening, I drove to their house, a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes from mine. The same drive I had made hundreds of times, the same streets, the same turn past the grocery store. Everything looked familiar, ordinary, but I felt different sitting behind the wheel, more alert, more aware, as if I was finally seeing the edges of something that had always been there, inside the house. Everything was as it always was, Olivia in the kitchen, moving efficiently, Daniel at the table with his laptop open, Ethan on the floor with his toys, laughter, light, the kind of scene that makes you believe nothing could ever be wrong. Olivia greeted me with a smile that reached her lips, but not quite her eyes. She asked again about the appointment, more casually this time, and again I gave her the same answer, simple, clean, nothing to question. I watched her closely, the way her shoulders relaxed just slightly, the way she turned back to the stove without asking anything further. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it confirmed something I had already begun to understand. She was managing information, controlling what was known and what was not. Dinner passed in small conversations, school updates, work deadlines, weekend plans. Daniel spoke about a new project, his voice steady, confident, unaware of anything beyond what was directly in front of him. I looked at my son and felt a quiet ache, not because of what I had discovered, but because of what he had not. He trusted the life he had built, and trust, once given, is not easily questioned. After dinner, Ethan climbed into my lap with a book, his small hands turning the pages carefully, his voice soft as he tried to read the words he had memorized. I smiled. I helped him when he stumbled. I kissed the top of his head, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel only what was there in front of me, a child who believed I was part of his world, regardless of what the truth might say. But even in that moment, I noticed something else. Olivia watching us from across the room, her expression unreadable, not warm, not cold, just observant, as if she was measuring something, calculating, and that was when I realized this had never been accidental. Nothing about her behavior over the years had been careless or unaware. It had been deliberate, consistent, controlled. When I left that night, I did not mention the lab forms. I did not ask questions. I did not give her any reason to adjust whatever story she had been maintaining. Instead, I drove home in silence, the streetlights passing one by one, and I made another decision. I would not rely on anything connected to her, not the hospital, not the records she had access to, not the version of events she had been presenting. If I wanted the truth, I would have to step outside of everything she could influence. The next morning, I took out an old folder from my desk, one I had not opened in years. It contained documents my husband had kept, contacts, names, people we trusted long before Olivia ever entered our lives. Among them was a name I recognized immediately, Dr. Alan Reeves, a private specialist who had once helped my husband with a complex insurance matter, someone thorough, discreet, and most importantly, independent. I sat there for a long moment, holding that name in my hands, understanding that once I made this call, there would be no going back to the quiet uncertainty I had been living in. There would only be answers, and answers, I knew, have a way of changing everything. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. Slowly, listening to each ring as if it marked the end of something I had not yet fully understood, and the beginning of something I was finally ready to face. Dr. Alan Reeves answered on the third ring, his voice calm and measured, the same way I remembered it from years ago. And for a moment I was taken back to a time when things were simpler, when my husband handled the complicated parts of our lives and I trusted that everything would always be as it should be. I introduced myself, carefully, clearly, giving him enough context to recognize the name without offering more than necessary. There was a brief pause on the line, followed by a shift in his tone, recognition, respect, and something else, curiosity. I told him I needed a private consultation, nothing urgent in my voice, nothing dramatic, just a quiet request from someone who understood the value of discretion. He agreed to see me the following morning at his office, a small clinic just outside the city, not part of any large hospital system, not connected to the places Olivia would expect. And that detail alone gave me a sense of control I had not felt in a long time. The next day, I drove out early, the sky still pale, the roads mostly empty, giving me time to think without interruption. His office was modest, clean, professional, the kind of place where things were handled carefully rather than quickly. Dr. Reeves greeted me personally, his expression polite but attentive, and when we sat down, I placed the folded lab form on his desk without a word. He read it slowly, his eyes moving across each line with a precision that reassured me I had made the right choice. He did not react immediately, which I appreciated. Instead, he asked a few simple questions. When was this test done? Who ordered it? Had I seen the results? I answered honestly where I could and left silence where I could not. And he did not press me. He simply nodded, as if he understood that some things reveal themselves better when not forced. After a moment, he leaned back slightly and said something that settled into me with quiet certainty. The documentation does not match standard formatting. The coding is inconsistent, and the timeline suggests that at least one version of this record has been altered or replaced. He did not say it dramatically. He did not raise his voice, but the clarity of his words removed any doubt I had been holding on to. I felt something inside me shift, not shock, not anger, just confirmation. The kind that allows you to stop questioning yourself and start moving forward. I asked him what it would take to run a new test, completely independent, fully verified. And he explained the process in detail: chain of custody, certified collection, direct reporting. Everything designed to ensure that the results could not be questioned or dismissed. I listened carefully, committing each step to memory, because this was not something I intended to do twice. When he finished, I nodded and told him I would arrange for the sample. He offered to handle the logistics, but I declined, politely, firmly. This was something I needed to control from beginning to end. As I left his office, I felt a sense of clarity that had been building since that moment in the pediatric clinic. Everything was aligning now. The inconsistencies, the controlled conversations, the subtle pauses in Olivia's voice. None of it was random. It was structured, maintained, protected. And that minute could also be exposed. That afternoon, I returned home and sat at my kitchen table again, the same place where I had first laid out the documents. But this time, I was not searching for answers. I was planning how to reveal them. I thought about timing, about access, about how to obtain what I needed without drawing attention. Ethan would be with me the following weekend. Olivia had already mentioned it. A sleepover, she said, as if it were a favor she was granting, and I agreed. Just as I always had, my voice warm, appreciative, giving her no reason to question anything. After I hung up, I wrote down the date, the time, every detail that would matter, because this was no longer about suspicion. It was about execution. I would collect the sample myself, following every guideline Dr. Reeves had outlined. I would deliver it directly, and I would wait, patiently, for the results that would either confirm everything or change everything. But in my heart, I already knew which it would be, because some truths do not arrive as surprises. They arrive as confirmations of what you have been quietly seeing all along. And as I sat there, looking at the empty chair across from me, the one my husband used to occupy, I realized something else. This was not just about uncovering what had been hidden. It was about restoring something that had been taken, not loudly, not violently, but carefully, over time, piece by piece, until the truth itself had been pushed aside, and I was no longer willing to let that happen. Saturday came quietly, the kind of soft morning that does not ask for attention, and I prepared for Ethan's visit the same way I always had. I made pancakes. I set out his favorite orange juice. I placed a small stack of books by the living room couch. Nothing about the house looked different. Nothing about me felt rushed, but beneath that calm routine, every step I took had purpose. When Olivia dropped him off just after 9, she stood at the door for a moment longer than usual, her eyes scanning the room as if she was checking for something she could not name. I smiled. I thanked her, I reassured her that everything would be fine, and she left with a polite nod, but I noticed the way her hand lingered on the doorknob for just a second too long, as if she was hesitating, questioning something she could not quite see. Once the door closed, the house settled into a quieter rhythm. Ethan ran to the kitchen, talking about a school project, his voice bright, his energy filling the space in a way that made everything feel normal. And for a while, I let it be just that, normal. We ate breakfast, we read together, we walked in the backyard where he liked to point out the smallest details, a bird on the fence, a leaf shaped like a heart, the simple things that children notice without effort, and I stayed present with him, because whatever truth I was uncovering, it did not belong to him. Not yet. Not in the way it belonged to the adults who had shaped his world. Later in the afternoon, when he grew tired, I suggested we watch a movie, something familiar, something he had seen before, and he agreed, curling up on the couch with a blanket, his attention slowly drifting as the quiet of the room settled around us. I waited, not impatiently, not anxiously, just waiting the way you do when you know exactly what you need to do and when the moment is right. Eventually, his breathing softened, his small body still, and I stood up carefully, moving through the room with the same steadiness I had practiced for years. I had prepared everything in advance, a sealed kit from Dr. Reeves, labeled, documented, precise. I followed each instruction exactly, no shortcuts, no improvisation, because this was not about suspicion anymore. It was about certainty. The process itself was simple, quiet, respectful, and when I was done, I sealed the sample and placed it in the envelope provided. My hands steady, my mind clear, I returned to the couch and sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his breathing. And for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what I had just done, not as a burden, but as a turning point, because from this moment forward, there would be no more guessing, no more piecing together fragments of behavior or inconsistencies in paperwork. There would only be what was real. When Ethan woke up, he looked at me with the same trust he always had, asking what time his parents would pick him up, and I answered him gently, just as I always did. Nothing in my voice betrayed what had changed, because to him, nothing had changed, and I intended to keep it that way for as long as I could. Olivia arrived that evening, her expression composed, her tone light as she asked about his day. I told her he had been wonderful, that we had watched a movie, that he had eaten well, and again, she studied me for a moment, as if she was searching for something beneath the surface, something I was not giving her. Daniel stood beside her, relaxed, unaware, thanking me the way he always did, and I nodded, accepting it, holding on to the familiar rhythm of these exchanges. But as they turned to leave, Olivia paused once more, her gaze lingering just long enough to confirm what I had already begun to understand. She was not as certain as she appeared. There was something beneath her control, something unsettled, and that meant I was not the only one who sensed that the foundation she had built was not as solid as it seemed. After they left, I locked the door, walked back to the kitchen, and placed the sealed envelope on the table. I looked at it for a long moment, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with a quiet recognition of what it represented. This was no longer about uncovering a possibility. It was about confirming a truth that had been carefully hidden for 7 years. The next morning, I drove back to Dr. Reeves's office, the envelope resting beside me, and as I handed it over, I felt a calm settle into me, the kind that comes when you have done everything exactly as it needed to be done. He accepted it without question, his professionalism as steady as before, and he told me the results would take a few days. I nodded, thanked him, and left, knowing that those few days would not change what I already understood. They would simply give it a form that could not be denied. And as I drove home, the city moving around me in its usual rhythm, I realized that the waiting was no longer the hardest part. The hardest part had already passed, the moment I chose to see what had been hidden and to act on it without hesitation. The waiting did not feel long, not in the way it used to when I was younger, when uncertainty would stretch time into something restless and heavy. Instead, it moved quietly, measured in ordinary moments, morning coffee, afternoon light, the soft hum of the television in the background. I did not check my phone constantly. I did not count the hours, because deep down, I already knew that the results would not bring me a surprise. They would only confirm what had been unfolding in front of me. For years, during those days, I continued my routine with careful precision. I visited the grocery store. I tended to my small garden. I answered Daniel's occasional calls, his voice always warm, always unaware, and each time I spoke to him, I felt the distance between what he believed and what I was about to reveal, but I never let it show. I responded the way a mother does, steady, supportive, giving him no reason to question anything. Olivia called once, midweek, her tone casual but slightly tighter than usual, asking if I would be available the following weekend again. I told her yes, of course, I would love to spend time with Ethan, and there was that same pause again, subtle, controlled, as if she was listening for something more in my voice, something that might signal a shift, but I gave her nothing, because silence, I had learned, can be more powerful than any answer. By Thursday afternoon, Dr. Reeves called, his voice as composed as it had been during our meeting. He asked if I could come in the next morning, and I agreed without hesitation. Not because I was eager, but because I was ready. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same place where this had all begun, and I allowed myself a moment to think, not about Olivia, not about the deception, but about Daniel, about the years he had built his life believing everything was exactly as it appeared. And I understood then that what I was about to uncover would not only change my understanding, it would change his, and that kind of change does not come gently. The next morning, I drove to the clinic just as I had before, the roads familiar, the sky clear, everything outwardly unchanged, but inside, there was a quiet certainty that this would be the last moment before everything shifted. Dr. Reeves greeted me and led me into his office. He closed the door behind us, sat down, and placed a folder on the desk between us. He did not speak immediately, and neither did I, because some things do not need to be introduced with words, they simply need to be seen. He opened the folder and turned it toward me, the pages clean, organized, precise, and I read them slowly, line by line, not rushing, not skipping ahead, because I wanted to absorb every detail exactly as it was presented. The results were clear, there was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The genetic markers did not match Daniel's, not even within the margin of error. And as I reached the end of the report, I felt something settle inside me, not shock, not anger, but a kind of stillness that comes when a question you have carried for too long finally finds its answer. I looked up at Dr. Reeves, and he met my gaze with a quiet understanding. He explained the findings in simple terms, confirming what was already written in front of me, and I nodded, not because I needed clarification, but because I acknowledged the finality of it. This was no longer a suspicion, no longer a pattern of inconsistencies. This was fact, documented, verified, undeniable. I thanked him, gathered the folder, and left the office with the same steady pace I had maintained throughout this entire process. Outside, the world moved as it always did, cars passing, people walking. Nothing in the environment reflected the shift that had just taken place, and yet, everything had changed. When I returned home, I placed the folder on the table and sat down, my hands resting calmly in front of me, and I considered what came next, because knowing the truth is one thing, deciding what to do with it is something else entirely. I thought about confronting Olivia immediately, about calling Daniel, about laying everything out in a single moment, but I dismissed those thoughts just as quickly as they came, because this was not a situation that could be handled impulsively, not after 7 years of careful deception. This required the same level of precision, the same control, the same patience that had allowed her to maintain it for so long. I would not raise my voice, I would not accuse, I would not give her the opportunity to deny or deflect. Instead, I would choose the moment, the setting, the conditions under which the truth would be revealed, and I would ensure that when it was, there would be no question, no confusion, no escape. I closed the folder gently and placed it back inside the envelope, not as something to hide, but as something to protect until the right moment. And as I sat there in the quiet of my home, I realized that this was no longer about discovering what had been done. It was about restoring what had been taken, and I intended to do that with the same calm certainty that had brought me this far. I did not rush into anything the day after I received the results, because rushing would have meant reacting, and reacting was exactly what Olivia would expect from someone like me. Instead, I did what I had always done. I observed, I listened, and I prepared. I placed the envelope containing the report inside a drawer in my bedroom, not hidden, just out of sight, because I did not need to look at it again to remember what it said. The truth had already settled into me, steady and unshakable. That afternoon, Daniel called, his voice lighter than usual, telling me they were planning a small family dinner on Sunday. Nothing special, he said, just a chance to spend time together. And I could hear the ease in his tone, the assumption that everything was exactly as it had always been. I agreed without hesitation, my voice calm, even warm, because in that moment, I understood something important. I would not need to create an opportunity. One was already being offered to me. Sunday would bring everyone into the same room, the same space where Olivia had spent years shaping her version of reality. And I would allow that setting to remain unchanged, because the contrast between what was believed and what was real would be far more powerful there than anywhere else. Over the next 2 days, I moved through my routine with quiet precision. But behind that routine, I began to arrange the details that would matter. I called Dr. Reeves once more, not to question the results, but to request an additional certified copy, properly sealed, properly documented, something that could not be dismissed or questioned in any way. He understood immediately and agreed to prepare it. I also reached out to a legal contact my husband had trusted for years, a man named Richard Lawson, someone who specialized in family and estate matters. I did not tell him everything, not yet, but I asked him to be available on Sunday afternoon, just in case his presence would be required. He did not ask unnecessary questions, which is why I had chosen him. By Saturday evening, everything was in place, the documents, the confirmations, the quiet assurance that when the moment came, I would not be standing alone with a claim. I would be standing with proof, with structure, with something that could not be undone by denial or confusion. Sunday arrived with the same calm surface as any other day, the kind of day where nothing appears out of place. I dressed simply, the way I always did, neutral colors, nothing that would draw attention, because this was not about appearance, it was about presence. When I arrived at Daniel's house, the door was already open, the smell of food drifting through the hallway, voices carrying from the kitchen, everything familiar, everything exactly as it had been so many times before. Olivia greeted me with a practiced smile, her tone welcoming, controlled, and for a moment, I wondered if she sensed anything beneath the surface, but if she did, she gave no sign of it. Dinner was set, the table arranged carefully, Ethan in his usual seat, Daniel relaxed, unaware, and I took my place without hesitation. The conversation moved easily at first, light topics, small details about work, school, the weather, the kind of exchanges that fill space without revealing anything meaningful. I participated just enough to maintain the rhythm, but I was not there for conversation. I was there for timing. I watched Olivia closely, the way she directed the flow of the evening, the way she subtly shifted topics, guided interactions, maintaining control in a way that had once gone unnoticed by me, but now stood out with quiet clarity. And as I observed her, I realized that her confidence came from one simple belief, that the version of events she had created was the only one that existed, that there was nothing outside of it that could challenge her. And that belief, more than anything else, was what I was about to change. Dessert was served, plates cleared, the evening moving toward its natural close. And that was when I decided, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the same calm certainty that had guided me from the beginning. I reached into my bag, not quickly, not in a way that would draw immediate attention, but with a deliberate motion that signaled a shift, and as I placed the sealed envelope on the table in front of me, I felt the room begin to change, not visibly, not yet, but in a way that I recognized immediately, because for the first time in 7 years, I was no longer responding to the world Olivia had created. I was introducing something she had not planned for, something she could not control, and I knew that once that envelope was opened, everything she had built would no longer be protected by silence. No one spoke at first, not because they did not notice the envelope, but because they did not understand what it meant, and in that silence, I could see the difference between them clearly. Daniel looked at me with mild curiosity, the kind you give when something unexpected appears but does not yet feel important. Olivia, however, did not look at the envelope right away. She looked at me, directly, her eyes searching, calculating, and in that brief moment, I saw it, the first crack in the control she had maintained for so long. I rested my hands calmly on the table, not pushing the envelope forward, not drawing attention to it, simply allowing its presence to settle into the room. Daniel was the first to speak, asking gently if everything was all right, his tone still light, still unaware, and I nodded, my expression unchanged, before sliding the envelope a few inches closer to the center of the table. I told him it was something I had come across recently, something I thought he should see. Nothing more, nothing less. He reached for it without hesitation, but Olivia's hand moved just slightly, not enough to stop him, but enough to register, a small, almost invisible motion that spoke louder than any words she could have chosen. Daniel opened the envelope, pulling out the documents with the same casual confidence he had carried through the entire evening. But as his eyes moved across the first page, that confidence began to shift, slowly at first, then more noticeably, his brow tightening, his posture changing, the ease in his shoulders replaced by something heavier, more focused. He read in silence for a few seconds, then looked up at me, confusion clear in his expression, asking what exactly he was looking at, and I answered him simply. I told him it was a certified DNA report, independently conducted, fully verified, and that he should read it carefully, all the way through. Olivia did not speak, but I could feel her attention sharpen, her body still, her breathing measured, as if she was holding herself in place, waiting for the exact moment she would need to respond. Daniel continued, reading, this time more slowly, his eyes moving line by line, and as the meaning began to settle in, I watched the realization take shape, not as a sudden shock, but as a gradual understanding that something fundamental was not as he believed. He looked up again, this time not at me, but at Olivia, his voice quieter now, asking her if she knew anything about this. And that was the moment everything changed. Olivia did not answer immediately. She smiled, a controlled, practiced expression, and said there must be some kind of mistake, that these tests can be inaccurate, that something must have gone wrong in the process. Her tone was calm, almost reassuring, the same tone she had used for years to guide every situation back into her control. But I had expected that. I had prepared for that. And without raising my voice, without interrupting her, I reached into my bag once more and placed a second envelope on the table, identical in appearance, but containing something she had not anticipated. I told Daniel that the report he was holding was only one part of it, that the second envelope contained the full documentation, including verification of the testing process, the chain of custody, and the certification from the lab itself. I watched as Olivia's expression shifted, just slightly, the smile fading at the edges, her eyes moving quickly to the second envelope. And for the first time since I had known her, she did not reach for control immediately. She hesitated. Daniel opened the second envelope, his hands no longer as steady as they had been moments before, and as he read through the additional pages, the room grew quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that does not need to be filled because it is already saying everything. Ethan looked between us, confused but quiet, sensing that something was different without understanding what it was, and I kept my focus on Daniel. Because this was not about confrontation, it was about clarity. When he finished reading, he did not speak right away. He simply sat there, the papers in his hands, the weight of what they contained settling into him. And I knew then that the truth had done exactly what it was meant to do. It had arrived without noise, without force, but with a presence that could not be dismissed. And in that moment, Olivia was no longer controlling the narrative, she was reacting to it. Daniel's hands remained on the papers, but he was no longer reading them. He was staring at a single point on the page as if the words might rearrange themselves into something easier to accept. The room had changed completely now, not through raised voices or sudden movement, but through the absence of certainty, the kind of stillness that follows when something unquestioned is finally brought into the light. Olivia inhaled slowly, her posture straightening as she shifted from hesitation to response, and when she spoke, her voice carried that same controlled calm she had used so many times before. She said the results did not make sense, that there must be an error, that these things happen more often than people think, and she looked at Daniel, not at me, directing her words toward the person she had always relied on to believe her, to support her version of events without question. Daniel did not answer immediately. His eyes moved from the documents to her face, searching, not accusing, but trying to understand. And in that moment, I could see the space between what he had believed and what he was now being forced to consider. Olivia continued, explaining how complicated medical records can be, how easy it is for something to be mislabeled or mishandled, her tone steady, almost persuasive. But there was a difference now, a slight urgency beneath the surface, a need to regain control that had not been there before. I did not interrupt her. I did not challenge her words directly, because this was not about arguing. It was about allowing the truth to stand on its own. When she finished, I spoke, not loudly, not sharply, but with a clarity that did not require repetition. I told Daniel that I had anticipated the possibility of doubt, that I had taken every step to ensure the accuracy of what he was holding. I explained that the tests had been conducted independently, that the samples had been collected under strict protocol, that the results had been verified and documented in a way that could not be altered or dismissed. I watched as Daniel absorbed this, his expression shifting again, the uncertainty giving way to something more focused, more grounded. He asked a question then, not directed at me, but at Olivia, a simple question, direct and unavoidable, asking if there was anything she wanted to explain. And for the first time, she did not answer immediately. The silence stretched just long enough to be noticed, not by a stranger, but by someone who had shared years with her, someone who understood her patterns even if he had never questioned them before. Ethan shifted in his seat, looking between his parents, sensing the tension without understanding it, and I felt a brief pull in my chest, not of doubt, but of recognition that what was unfolding would ripple beyond this moment. Olivia finally spoke, her voice quieter now, less controlled. She said that things were not always as simple as they seemed, that there were circumstances, complications, things Daniel did not fully understand. But even as she spoke, the structure of her explanation lacked the certainty it once carried. It was no longer a narrative she was guiding. It was a response she was assembling in real time, and that difference was unmistakable. Daniel leaned back slightly, the papers still in his hands, and I could see the shift in him more clearly now. Not anger, not yet, but a break in the automatic trust that had defined his reactions for so long. He was thinking, questioning, evaluating, and once that process begins, it does not easily reverse. I remained where I was, my hands resting calmly on the table, my role in this moment already complete, because the truth had been placed exactly where it needed to be, not forced, not exaggerated, simply presented, and it was doing what it always does when it is allowed to stand without interference. It was reshaping everything around it. Olivia looked at me then, directly, her eyes no longer searching, but measuring, as if she was trying to understand how much I knew, how far this extended beyond the documents on the table, and I met her gaze without expression, not with hostility, not with satisfaction, but with the same calm presence I had carried from the beginning, because this was never about winning or losing. It was about revealing, and once something is revealed, it cannot return to what it was before. The room remained quiet, but it was no longer the comfortable quiet of a family dinner. It was something else entirely, something heavier, more honest, and as Daniel finally placed the papers down on the table, I knew that whatever came next would not be guided by assumption anymore. It would be shaped by what he had just seen, and that was something no one, not even Olivia, could undo. Daniel did not raise his voice, and that was what made the moment feel even more final, because instead of reacting, he began to separate himself from everything he had assumed to be true. He looked at Olivia again, but this time there was no confusion in his expression, only a quiet demand for honesty that did not need to be spoken twice. The kind that comes when someone realizes that the answer they are about to hear will not restore what has already been broken. Olivia held his gaze for a second, then looked away, and that small movement carried more weight than anything she could have said. The room felt smaller, not physically, but in the way that truth removes the space people use to avoid it. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table now, no longer holding the papers, as if he no longer needed them in front of him to understand what they meant. He asked her again, this time more directly, if there was anything about Ethan's birth, about those early years, that she had not told him, and for a moment, it seemed like she might try to rebuild the same structure she had used before, to explain, to redirect, to soften what was undeniable. But something in his tone stopped that from happening. It was not anger, it was not accusation, It was certainty, and certainty leaves very little room for manipulation. Olivia's shoulders lowered just slightly, the controlled composure she had maintained beginning to slip at the edges. She spoke carefully, choosing each word with the same precision she had always used. But this time, the words did not carry authority. They carried limitation. She said that there had been complications, that things had not gone the way they were supposed to, that decisions had been made under pressure. But even as she spoke, it was clear that the explanation was no longer leading anywhere. It was circling around something she could not fully say. Daniel listened, but he did not interrupt. He did not argue. He simply absorbed what she was offering. And when she finished, the silence that followed was not empty. It was complete, because nothing she had said had changed the facts in front of him. Ethan shifted again, looking at his father with a quiet uncertainty, and Daniel turned to him for a brief moment, his expression softening in a way that reminded me of the man he had always been beneath everything else. Then he looked back at Olivia, and I saw it clearly then, the moment when trust does not shatter loudly, but quietly steps back and refuses to return to its place. He nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, and then he spoke, his voice steady, asking one final question, not about details, not about explanations, but about truth, asking her if she had known, all along, that what they had built together was not what it appeared to be. Olivia did not answer right away, and that pause, longer this time, carried the answer before she even spoke. When she finally did, her voice was lower, less controlled. She said she had done what she thought was necessary, that she had wanted to protect what they had, but the words felt distant, disconnected from the reality that now stood between them. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, and when he did, the man sitting at that table was no longer the same one who had started the evening. He reached for the documents once more, not to read them again, but to gather them, to hold them as something real, something he could not ignore, and then he placed them back on the table, aligning them carefully, as if restoring order to something that had just been undone. I remained silent, because there was nothing left for me to say. My role in this had ended the moment the truth became visible. Olivia looked at me one last time, not with calculation now, but with a kind of recognition, as if she understood that the silence she had relied on for so long had been replaced by something she could not influence. And I met her gaze with the same calm I had carried from the beginning, not as an accusation, not as a victory, but as a boundary, something that simply existed and would not move. Daniel stood up slowly, the movement deliberate, controlled, and he walked a few steps away from the table, creating distance, not just physically, but in a way that marked the separation between what had been and what was now. Ethan watched him, uncertain, and Daniel turned back, his voice gentler when he spoke to his son, telling him everything was going to be all right, even if he did not yet know what that meant. And in that moment, I understood that the truth does not end a story, it changes the direction of it. And as I rose from my chair, gathering my things without haste, I knew that what had been hidden for 7 years was no longer shaping this family in silence. It had been brought into the open, and from this point forward, whatever remained would have to stand on what was real, not on what had been carefully constructed to appear that way.